So we're a week and a half into Andy Burnham's premiership as Prime Minister, and in this episode of Politics Weekly, we will go and look at his cabinet appointments, some of the policies and the personnel behind his new operation. All in this episode of Politics Weekly.
We now come to Andy Burnham, member for Makerfield.
I am going to do things differently.
A pair of eyelashes and a black t-shirt.
It's dark blue, actually.
We need a different path completely.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Politics Weekly. I'm Jack Evans, the host of Politics Weekly, the host of Elections with Jack Evans, and the political editor for SSD Radio Toaster. So I will be taking you through all of the things that have happened in the last week and a half under the new leadership of Andy Burnham as the new Prime Minister. So let's first take us back to that Monday where Andy Burnham took over from Keir Starmer. We had Keir Starmer coming out of Downing Street for the final time, saying, "I leave with a smile on my face." He then leaves Downing Street, travels maybe 5 minutes to Buckingham Palace. He has a 30-minute conversation or audience with the King. He gives his resignation. The King accepts. The Prime Minister, or the former Prime Minister at that point, Keir Starmer, then leaves. We then have maybe, I think it was something like 7.5 minutes where the King can have a nice cup of tea. And then Andy Burnham, the incoming Prime Minister, who is at this point only the leader of the Labour Party, having been given that job for the previous Friday, he then arrives at Buckingham Palace, and then he then gets a private audience with the King, which is 35-ish minutes, they say, about a little bit longer than Keir Starmer's. The King offers him the job of Prime Minister. Andy Burnham accepts. Then Andy Burnham leaves Buckingham Palace. He travels to Downing Street, where he makes his first speech, which he says, if I can find some quotes, "I hear you," is how he is in one of his opening lines in that speech. "I hear you," talking about the public and their, to quote Keir Starmer, wanting their politics to tread more lightly on their lives. "We will" is a message that he repeats about 5 times. He says "we will" on various different promises. And then "the moment we bring back hope," he ends his speech. And I think hope was a real message of his over the last couple months, whether it was the early kind of push to get into Parliament with his failed attempt in Gorton and Denton, through to his Makerfield success throughout his Makerfield by-election campaign, and then winning that election, and then his leadership election, being unopposed to the leadership, despite the attempt of a single MP, who tried to make Catherine West the leader, even though Catherine West did not want to be the leader and herself said that Andy Burnham should be the leader. Yes, so that was all of the speeches, the main speeches of the day. We then move into cabinet firings and cabinet hirings, with David Lammy, Steve Reid being the first couple to go. Lammy and Reid both resigned. Peter Kyle was then sacked by Andy Burnham, we understand. Rachel Reeves was offered, we think, either one or two jobs. They say education and then defence, but those are still rumours. We haven't had any confirmation on the specific jobs, even after a week and a half. She then resigned. And then you've got Lord Hermer resigned. He was a close friend of Keir Starmer and was the Attorney General and Advocate General of Northern Ireland. Liz Kendall resigns. Joe Stevens was sacked. Hilary Benn resigns. And then you've got Darren Jones resign. Or no, he was sacked, wasn't he? And throughout this, we're also getting a couple cabinet appointments. It was really slow, which was a pain for me because it meant I spent most of the previous night doing a article about Ed Miliband, ready to go because we all thought he was going to be Chancellor. Turns out he wasn't. Spent most of the night doing that. Then get a couple hours sleep and then get up, start the news coverage for our live WhatsApp channel and YouTube pages of Elections with Jack Evans. Then I'm running that from about 8 o'clock through to about midnight, essentially, because of how slow the cabinet appointments was. All while I think I had to write an article about Wes Streeting because we all thought he'd get a senior cabinet job, which he kind of did, kind of didn't. Yeah. So we then get John Healey being appointed as Chancellor of the Exchequer. Now, I think this was a move that surprised literally the entire country, but like everybody that looks at it now thinks, of course it was going to be John Healey. Who else would it be but John Healey? But we didn't see it. I predicted it when he came down Downing Street first. I was like, oh, the first appointment's going to be as a Chancellor, isn't it? So of course it is. But then you still have doubts, don't you? He might have just got there early. But there he does get Chancellor of the Exchequer. It's probably a stroke of genius from Andy Burnham, in my opinion. A complete and utter stroke of genius. He has been kicking around for quite a while in Parliament. He was the he did two jobs in the Treasury in the Brown Blair era, New Labour, things like that. He also had two jobs in the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government, which I think it was called something similar back then, in that Brown Blair period. He then did a couple stints in opposition. He had the housing brief maybe once or twice as the shadow housing minister, I think, not secretary. So that was his brief in opposition. He was very into devolution, so this is what I'm talking about, stroke of genius. Devolution, one of Andy Burnham's main things, literally the whole Manchesterism up north, give power to the people, as John Lennon would say. That was all a John Healey, something that he was really enthusiastic back in under like the Cameron Osborne days, when he was in opposition. John Healey wrote lots about that back then. So I think this is possibly the biggest stroke of genius from Andy Burnham. John Healey then serves as Shadow Secretary of State for Defence. Then Labour win the general election in 2024. He becomes the Secretary of State for Defence. He then resigns that position only a couple of months ago saying that Keir Starmer wasn't spending enough on defence. So there you have it, another financial matter, something that he will want to push hard on in the Treasury. Maybe some people in the Treasury won't like him because he basically called out the Treasury for not giving him enough, but hey ho, it's going to be a priority for him, isn't it? Something that he wants to work for in his own position as Chancellor. And then he also has that devolution aspect, some experience in the Treasury, some experience in housing, community and local government for the devolution, which is at the heart of the new Burnham ministry. So I can't explain any further how much of a stroke of genius this is from Andy Burnham. I think this is definitely the best appointment he has made throughout all of his cabinet appointments, all of his junior ministerial appointments. Yeah, that's John Healey, who became Chancellor. Then we had Ed Miliband and Shabana Mahmood come down Downing Street together. That iconic image of them coming down Downing Street together. Nobody pointed it out on any of the rolling news channels that were going on, which were all on various screens for me. But I could see Ed Miliband in the top corner of Downing Street waiting, and then Shabana Mahmood's car pulls up. Ed Miliband then crosses the street. Shabana Mahmood gets out the car, and then they walk together up Downing Street. These are two people that the media had speculated to be the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Neither of them get that job. Shabana Mahmood reportedly didn't want the job anyway. She stayed as Home Secretary, which was the outcome she really, really wanted. Miliband became the Foreign Secretary, a job that people thought that they might get his brother to do, which he previously had a rivalry with when he beat his brother to the leadership. You can read all about that in my Ed Miliband article on SSD Radio Toaster. But yeah, there was a whole thing then in 2010, 11-ish. And then you've got everybody thought that David, his brother, would be brought back from New York, where he's been president of the International Rescue Committee, and be made a Lord Miliband, and then would be the Foreign Secretary. But no, his brother, Ed Miliband, who everybody thought was going to be the Chancellor of the Exchequer, becomes the Foreign Secretary. Not a job he looked very happy on having. He obviously said, "Oh, it's the honour of my life." He then comes out to Chris Mason, starts talking about his parents, their immigration to this country, and all of that. So, kind of, yeah, Foreign Secretary. We then have Louise Haigh, Andy Burnham's real number two here. There's no doubt about it. So she is made the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, which is basically the job. It's like Secretary of State for the Cabinet Office, essentially, which in this case they want to kind of reposition as the Cabinet Office and Prime Minister's Office and things like that. So she's running that. She's also the Minister for the Cabinet Office, which gives her all sorts of extra responsibilities. She's also the first Secretary of State, so that's kind of like Deputy Prime Minister. Yeah, so David Lammy was the Deputy Prime Minister under Starmer. Previously, it was Angela Rayner. We'll get on to that. But yeah, he was the Deputy Prime Minister, and then Andy Burnham scraps this. Well, not scraps. He doesn't just it's gone. But he just doesn't use it. He gets Louise Haigh as First Secretary of State, which is kind of an older title, which means the same thing. It was the last person to hold it was Dominic Raab, who was Boris Johnson's first Secretary of State. I think the only reason it kind of came into power under Dominic Raab was he then had to use his job as first Secretary of State to act as the Prime Minister whilst there was, remember when Boris Johnson got COVID, that when he was in the hospital, Dominic Raab kind of took over, and that was kind of the only real reason it was used in Boris Johnson's time, because we don't really have a set order of succession. Like in America, it goes president, vice president, and I think it's Speaker of the House, and then there's a list of like Secretary of State, and then list of various cabinet members. So Louise Haigh, first Secretary of State. Andy Burnham's number 2. Some other headlines. Yvette Cooper, wife to Ed Miliband. Not Ed Miliband, Ed Balls, the now TV presenter, moves from Foreign Secretary to Health Secretary. Pat McFadden stays at Work and Pensions. But let's have a look now at the full cabinet, the list of cabinet ministers. So you've got Andy Burnham, obviously Prime Minister, First Lord of the Treasury, Minister for the Civil Service, Minister for the Union. That's actually his list of jobs. People just say Prime Minister, but that's what the jobs come with, I think. First Lord of the Treasury is what it traditionally was. You were the First Lord of the Treasury, which is actually above the Chancellor in the Treasury. And if you look on the door of number 10 Downing Street, it says First Lord of the Treasury. Minister for the Civil Service was a job created under Harold Wilson, so a bit more recent. Kind of overall responsibility for the entire civil service. Minister for the Union was a job created under Boris Johnson, so very recently. Basically, every Prime Minister is responsible for keeping the Union of England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland together. I'm sure the Cornish would love to be included in that as well. But yeah, so that's Andy Burnham, Prime Minister. Then you've got his number 2, Louise Haigh, who, as I just said, First Secretary of State, Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster and Minister of the Cabinet Office. You then have John Healey, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, as we've just said. Ed Miliband, also we've just stated, Foreign Secretary. Shahbaz Mahmood, also as the Home Secretary. Then we've got Wes Streeting, that guy I had to write an article about, becomes the Defence Secretary, running the Defence Department. People are a bit baffled by this, but yeah, the reason we think he became the Defence Secretary is because Rachel Reeves turned down the Defence Secretary job, so they had to kind of find somebody to fill it. He was obviously going to get some cabinet job, having resigned, and also saying that he wasn't going to stand against Andy Burnham. So he becomes the Defence Secretary. Alex Norris becomes the Justice Secretary and Lord Chancellor. Lord Chancellor is just the old-fashioned title, essentially, for the Justice Secretary. There's historical meanings, and I'm sure it brings with it powers and things, but that's essentially what it is. I'm sure I'm offending loads of people in the Ministry of Justice right now. And then you've got Yvette Cooper, as we've said, as the Health Secretary. Lucy Powell, now this is interesting. She gets appointed as the Education Secretary. People thought that she might get Deputy Prime Minister because she was the elected leader of the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, meaning she is deputy to Andy Burnham in the Labour Party. She was previously the deputy to Keir Starmer in the Labour Party. Her predecessor as deputy leader of the Labour Party, Angela Rayner, was the Deputy Prime Minister under Keir Starmer for a brief period of time before she resigned. Get onto that in a minute, actually in a second. So she doesn't get appointed Deputy Prime Minister. It would be weird having a First Secretary of State and a Deputy Prime Minister. The line of it would essentially create two camps, wouldn't it? It would create the Hague camp and the Powell camp, where both of them are going to think they're number two in command. It's like having a vice chair and a deputy chair, isn't it? Who's actually in charge or second in command. And then Angela Rayner gets reappointed the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government. She was that job from the 2024 election to September 2025, where she kind of kicks off the only reshuffle that Starmer ever had to do. So she kicks that off because there was a scandal about her finances. So she resigns. She resigns as Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, Deputy Prime Minister, and Housing, Community and Local Government Secretary. But she comes back as the Housing, Community and Local Government Secretary in this government. Then you've got Miatta Fahnbulleh as the Energy Secretary. There are rumours that the only way Ed Miliband would budge out of energy was for Miatta Fahnbulleh to become the Energy Secretary. Pat McFadden, as we've said, the Work and Pensions Secretary. Jonathan Reynolds becomes the Business Secretary once again. He had that job until that September 2025 reshuffle where he was moved to Chief Whip. But no, he's back as Business Secretary, but now with more powers. He's become the Secretary of State for Business, Innovation, Business, Innovation and Trade, I think, which has basically separated the Department of Science, Technology and Innovation. So most of the science and technology appear to have, or the technology especially, have gone to Department for Culture, Media and Sport. And then the rest has been moved to Johnny Reynolds' new department of, well, kind of renamed department. It's not really a new department, but yeah. Heidi Alexander becomes the Transport Secretary. Well, she stays as the Transport Secretary. Yes, she was that under Keir Starmer, but she wasn't appointed at the general election. Louise Haigh actually was the Transport Secretary. There was a whole thing, and then Heidi Alexander, who was previously the Deputy Mayor of London for Transport, becomes the Transport Secretary, and then she stayed in through Andy Burnham's new government. Dame Angela Eagle becomes the EFRA Secretary, Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. So like farming and things like that, which I think is in the nicest way weird. You appoint a Merseyside MP somewhere where there's literally no fields in her constituency to the job of farming. So I guess I've been to plenty of events where the new sciences and technology of farming have been shown off, with the kind of city building. Let's build big skyscrapers with farms in them. Maybe that's the approach. She's a veteran of government. She was elected in 1992 to the House of Commons. She served Brown and Blair, served in Starmer. She was most recently, the Minister for Security after Healy resigned. Dan Jarvis became Defence Secretary and Angela Eagle became the Security Minister. But before that, she was previously in DEFRA as a minister. She's now been promoted back into DEFRA as the Secretary of State. Again, yeah, yeah. Let's just roll on. Lisa Nandy, the Culture Secretary. She was the Culture Secretary. She's the MP for Wigan, which is the neighbouring constituency to Andy Burnham. Yes, so that's continuing on as from her job as Culture Secretary, which she's had since 2024. Chris Bryant becomes the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. Yeah, just I wouldn't say, I'm not going to say small, but it is a smaller job than some cabinet jobs. Douglas Alexander becomes the Secretary of State for Scotland. He's quite well known in the kind of Scottish Labour circles. Stephen Kinnock becomes the Secretary of State for Wales. Now, I've always been fascinated by the Kinnock family, not so much their politics, just their family. So Stephen Kinnock is the son of Neil Kinnock, Lord Kinnock, who was previously the leader of the Labour Party and leader of the opposition. So he top job in the Labour Party. Neil Kinnock had married to Baroness Kinnock, who had ministerial jobs, worked in Europe alongside her husband, who also had a European commissioner job in the 2000s. Yeah, so they're a kind of a power couple, so to say. Or Baroness Kinnock sadly died quite recently. She was born a couple miles away from where I live now, a village that's quite familiar to me. Yeah, so that's and then Stephen Kinnock, yes, he's the son of them, but also married the Prime Minister of Denmark, not the current one, the previous Prime Minister of Denmark. So there, yeah, so he was the spouse to the Prime Minister of Denmark, which is like an unofficial title thing. And then there was a brief, like 4-month crossover where he had that role as kind of supporting the Prime Minister of Denmark, and also being being an MP in Wales. He was previously under Starmer. He was a health minister, but has now been made the Secretary of State for Wales, and I think that's a beautiful appointment right there. So Alan Campbell stays on as leader of the House of Commons. He's had that job since Lucy Powell was kicked out of the Starmer cabinet. Yeah, he was previously the chief whip. Baroness Smith, Angela Smith, leader of the House of Lords, stays in that job. She's had that job since 2024 when they won the general elections. You've got Annalise Midgley, becomes the chief whip. This is the first ever job she's ever had, except for being an MP. She came in as the 2024 cohort, so I think that's an interesting appointment. Andy Burnham said that he didn't want like a strong whip's office, or he didn't want a whip's office at all, but it would be unprecedented for him to knock it down within the first 3 minutes of government. So yeah, he's appointed Annalise Midgley. So I'm suspecting kind of a weaker whip's office, more backbench friendly, hopefully for him working with the PLP, Parliamentary Labour Party, Women's PLP, and then the cooperative, whatever that committee is called, which actually I haven't touched on it. Andy Burnham is the first ever Labour and cooperative Prime Minister. The Cooperative Party is kind of a party that works with and kind of inside the Labour Party. Yes, that's interesting. And then the final cabinet minister is Bridget Phillipson, who was the Secretary of State for Education and the Minister for Women's and Equality. She has been fired from the Education Secretary, but remains the Minister for Women and Equalities, which has now been granted itself as a cabinet level position. So I think that's quite interesting. Means that I think it's good, allows that office to shine a bit more than it has. It has quite often just been used as a secondary office, really. I'm not good, yeah, somewhat of a secondary office. And then you've got these ministers which aren't cabinet ministers, but they attend cabinet, which is always quite interesting because they tend to vary prime minister to prime minister, except for a couple. So Ellie Reeves, the sister of Rachel Reeves, becomes the Attorney General, replacing Lord Hermer. Basically, the government's top legal job. That's always kind of been a position that's always been attending cabinet. And then Emma Reynolds, who was previously the EFRA secretary, becomes the chief secretary to the Treasury. Yes, so that's interesting. She replaces the Northampton North MP Lucy Rigby, who has been demoted back to her old job of, so I think it's Economic Secretary to the Treasury and Cities Minister. So those are the two that kind of have always been attending cabinet. And then you've got the new AI Minister, who is now a cabinet and Department for Culture, Media and Sport job. So that's a new job. You've got Hamish Faulkner, who is the new Minister for Intergovernmental Relationships and European Relationships. Intergovernmental has existed for quite a while, but European has not. So that's a real interesting one in terms of where Burnham wants to go with Europe. And Matthew Pennycook, who has been the Minister for Housing and Planning ever since the 2024 election, but has now been granted to attend cabinet. So that's quite interesting. He's obviously got quite a lot to say in the housing brief with all their new houses and affordable houses that they want to build in Andy Burnham's new government, and also kind of devolution and things like that. So I think that's an interesting thing. PM's office, some notable appointments is James Purnell, who's a former cabinet secretary, then worked at the BBC, has had some private sector appointments. He's basically done everything. A lot of people love James Purnell. He becomes the chief of staff to Andy Burnham. I think that's a good appointment from Andy. Alison Phillips becomes the deputy chief of staff, and Caroline Simpson becomes the deputy chief of staff with a focus on number 10 North, which is the new office in Greater Manchester. She was I think she still is, the chief executive of the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, which is the authority of which Andy Burnham chaired as the mayor of Greater Manchester. You've also got interesting appointments. James Murray becomes the financial secretary to the Treasury, having previously been health secretary after Wes Streeting. Lucy Rigby, as I just said, demoted to economic secretary to the Treasury and cities minister, a job she had until recently. Dan Jarvis, who was previously the Defence Secretary, gets moved back to the Minister for Security, a job that he had before he became Defence Secretary. Anna Sarwar, this is really interesting, the leader of the Scottish Labour Party, which is like a devolved version of the Labour Party, becomes Lord Sarwar. Well, he's going to become Lord Sarwar when Parliament recess ends in September. And he's been appointed the Minister for Trade. He has resigned as leader of the Scottish Labour Party, meaning there's going to be a Scottish Labour leadership election, which is going to be interesting. So that is quite interesting in terms of the appointments. The appointments I always find, because I think people are really the driver of anything that you have to do, despite AI and things, which may be why we have a new minister for AI. But yeah, I think that's in terms of appointments. I'm going to quickly run through some of the early policies. But yeah, I've been yapping for 34 minutes and 42 seconds, so I'm going to be try keep it brief. Andy Burnham, first day, he says he wants to end homelessness in the UK. This is a promise he has been focusing on through his entirety of his job as Mayor of Greater Manchester, donating quite a lot of his salary to charities aiming to stop it. So that's been a big focus close to his heart. Kind of the thing about it is he tried doing it as Mayor of Greater Manchester. He did a whole scheme. A lot of theories say that homeless people kind of go to Greater Manchester to these schemes, making it harder to stop it in Greater Manchester, which is why he wants to take it as a national project. And then you've got pausing the early release scheme, which was quite a rushed bill through Parliament, you might say, or just kind of, yeah, we're going to do it. Led by David Lammy, the former Justice Secretary, which, because the prison spaces were running out, there was literally, if they kept putting people in prison, they would run out of spaces. They had to kind of let some people go. That was very controversial. There's been multiple scandals in people that weren't meant to be let go being let go, and then them having manhunts to try track them down. Yeah, so that's a big one. Education, he wants to reform education to make it more technical by the technical education, kind of specifying in real world things, which I'm a big advocate of. Probably should try stay more politically neutral than that, but yeah, that's something that has been real close to him. Yeah, so that's a big policy that he wants there. Yeah, there's been social care. Has been a quite recent one. He wants to reform social care. He tried advocating for this a long time ago, when he was the health secretary at the back end of the Brown government. But because he did it so late on in the government, it was then scrapped by Nick Clegg, the Deputy Prime Minister, the Liberal Democrat leader and Deputy Prime Minister in the Cameron-Clegg government, and David Cameron, the Prime Minister and leader of the Conservative Party in the Clegg-Cameron government. Yeah, so that's going to be interesting. Stopping digital ID was another one. He's going to move some money around apparently, but then Darren Jones, as the kind of the first rebel to the new Burnham government, the former chief secretary to the Treasury and the former Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister and the former Minister for Intergovernmental Relationships, the former, I think, Cabinet Minister and the former Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. Lots of jobs that he held together over two separate periods or two separate stints, once first in the Treasury and then second in the Cabinet Office, and number 10 that came immediately after each other. He said that the money hadn't actually been allocated for digital ID, meaning there was no money spare that he could move into anything else. So that caused a big stir in Labour, saying, "Oh, shut up, Darren. we want to have quite a positive start to the government. Please stop making problems." But yeah, I think that's quite interesting for him to come out. He's a smart guy. I would have kept him around if I were Andy Burnham in a junior position in the Cabinet Office. Maybe he wouldn't have accepted, but I would have done that considering he is a very intelligent man. So that's kind of a run through of some of the main policies. I've probably missed a ton. I've missed loads of foreign policy, I get that, but this is like a 40-minute episode already, and I think I want my dinner. So, thank you for watching this Politics Weekly episode with me, Jack Evans. I hope you follow us on Spotify, and maybe subscribe on YouTube to either the SSD Radio Toaster YouTube channel or my own YouTube channel, which posts various content about various different things, whether it be in my professional capacity or my personal capacity. Thank you very much for watching or listening. Goodbye.